Okay, welcome to another episode of CineCringe for the garbageous movie. Garbageous? No, how do you say that? Garbageous. Garbageous?
Garbage. Yeah. I think what you're running into is that it's not a real word.
Yeah, my name is George, and with me is Chris, and he's gonna tell you what we are doing today.
Today we are doing the 1999 steampunk western action comedy buddy picture Wild Wild West, starring Will Smith and Kevin Kline and directed by Barry Sonnenfeld.
I think we both had the same sensation after watching this movie, which is it's a lot worse than we remembered.
I was fairly young when this movie was coming out, and I have distinct memories of like wearing a cowboy hat with my childhood best friend Noah and like running around the house and listening to the Will Smith title track,
Right.
Wild Wild West, and like, yeah, I was super into this movie when it came out.
I did watch it one time, like genuinely sat down and watched it, and I was like maybe 16 at the time. But I think part of it was because my English was pretty terrible, and I couldn't really understand the plot. So I was just basically enjoying the visuals, primarily Salma Hayek hitting my hormonal teenage years just right.
While I was watching this with Caroline, I was telling her, you know, there's a shot of Bai Ling's butt and there's a shot of Salma Hayek's butt, and I can like remember sitting in the theater as tween boy and being like, wow! I could still picture those shots like decades later.
So this movie apparently had a Burger King burger as part of the promotion during this film's release. I mean, that seems like the sign of raging success for a movie to have a burger named after it at Burger King, right?
To be honest, and we'll get into it, I was having a blast for the first 20 minutes or so, and then it just slowly peters out in a very unsatisfying way.
It's got one of the most charismatic cast. And their charisma carries pretty much all of it to the best of their capabilities. You know, you can only do so much with a complete pile of garbage. But like, and I think that's probably why that there's always this sensation of something promising but never delivered.
One thing that really struck me this time around, I remembered that Will Smith was hilarious. I remembered that Kevin Kline was hilarious. I knew them both going into that movie. What I didn't remember, probably because of my stupid sexist little boy brain, was how funny Salma Hayek was. She was hilarious in this movie.
Yes, she's actually the funny part, I think.
I agree. I couldn't believe, like, obviously she's funny now, but her comic instincts were totally there already 20 years ago.
And now watching it again as an adult, or what I think is an adult, the comedy that was supposed to be Will Smith's dialogue and the comedy that's supposed to be Kevin Kline's dialogue is actually pretty shitty. Yeah, it's the funny really just comes from their acting, not what they say.
I found myself laughing at jokes that made me wonder why I was laughing at them. You're totally right. It's because of the actors. Yeah. Like, Kevin Kline has that line where he's like, "You handled the stupid stuff." And I was like, that's not even like a sitcom level joke, but it made me laugh.
Because he's a good actor.
Because he's a good actor. Because he's an Oscar winner for a comedy.
Like, it's like if you take a really, really shitty dad joke, but you let, I don't know, an Australian say it, it's funnier because they're more charismatic. Their accents are great. You know what I mean?
So in 1998, Will Smith was on the phone with young filmmakers, the Wachowskis, and they were like, "Hey, Will Smith, you want to star in our movie, The Matrix?" And Will Smith was like, "Hell nah," because he wanted to do Wild Wild West.
And it's I guess a remake or adaptation of a TV show from the 60s, right?
Yes, that's right.
Do you know anything about it? Is it also like this? Is it basically just Cowboy plus Inspector Gadget? And then
I have no idea.
We probably should have done some homework and look into it. But the one thing I do know is the original version of the Confederate General is played by an actor who is a little person. Yeah, and they made him a legless guy on a steampunk spider leg or crab legs.
Okay, fair enough. And that comes back in a big way in the feature. It's definitely an interesting look back at and political correctness of 20 years ago. The racial stuff is handled differently than it would be today, I think. Just say that. Like so many movies used to do, it opens with our hero just making out with a sexy woman who is clearly just there to be a sexy woman and who we will never see again, and whose main function is just to establish how awesome he is.
Yeah, I in this case, I'm glad that we've developed better script writing to showcase how awesome a character is without always having to fall back to this one single trope.
Absolutely.
And you know what? I'm not saying that this trope should be completely out of the question for all movies, but it has to make sense for the character. If his character is established to be a very sex-driven player kind of a character, maybe this kind of opening makes sense because it's consistent.
Like it could be that it was a character where that was an important feature, that he's like, kind of a slut.
Exactly.
We got us a shiny.
My main reaction was just like, man, I saw this in theater when I was 11 or whatever, and he was gonna say the N-word. I don't know, those two things didn't fit together in my head very much. But I don't know, you know, we do also have to say 11 years or whatever before Django Unchained, here was our badass black cowboy looking awesome. True. Credit to Will Smith. I can see why that seemed like it could be an awesome movie. So we introduced Kevin Kline in one of his many epic outfits, but the other thing that was really taking hold of me here is that early on in the movie, it's just like, they really wanted to push the black comedy to 11 from Men in Black, I guess, because this movie's really, like, kind of gross. And Ted Levine's character, especially, who also gets introduced here, General McGrath, is, like, really disgusting. And early on, you're just looking at all these really repulsive things, and the saloon is really just gross and icky. Yeah. And it was a weird thing, because you don't often see outright disgustingness that actually makes you cringe in Hollywood movies now, and you sure do in this movie.
Kevin Kline's, you know, saloon wench? Is that what you call
sure.
The profession that he's trying to pretend to be is a fairly terrible getup, but the fact that he's doing this in front of Ted Levine, who did a fantastic drag outfit in Silence of the Lambs.
Nice one. So true. Oh yeah, and this is just another great example of the tone of this movie. They send an exploding wagon down towards the bar, and the line to introduce that concept is about the welcome wagon. I mean, you know, to be fair, this is like Batman and Robin came out around the same year or something. I guess puns is what Hollywood had been reduced to. And
oh, you know, now that I think about it, I think it's missing one element that I feel like Hollywood isn't very good at doing. British comedy is really good at groan-worthy puns, right? But they do it in a way knowing that it's groan-worthy. That's like, look at how bad this pun and this joke is. Let's all groan together. Gotcha. Hollywood, especially in this movie, doesn't seem to have that last point. So they tell these terrible jokes that are punny and cheesy and campy, but they do it in a way that's like, look how clever we are.
Right.
While the joke isn't.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me.
Right, okay, so this is one of the first ongoing, and I say the word joke loosely, is that Kevin Kline's character is consistently confused with Ulysses Grant, the president, throughout the entire film. The problem is, it's not really that funny to begin with, and then they do it about another 2,000 times.
Grant is also played by Kevin Kline.
Yes, and that is basically the level of the joke, right? but I think...
Eddie Murphy territory.
But I think this is a consistent theme with all the humor in this film, is that it outstays its welcome. Every joke in this movie runs for so long.
None more. I mean, we're not at the climax yet, but the joke with Will Smith belly dancing is like the longest joke. You know, you're right, and what that's highlighting for me too is that so many of these jokes aren't integrated with the plot at all. They're just like, it's just like shtick. Yeah. Like, we're gonna take 2 minutes to do the boob joke. It sets up nothing. It has nothing to do with anything. You're right.
Oh, nice of you to drop in.
Like, the whole train is seemingly designed to, like, be taken over, and he gets into some sort of Die Hard situation. Because, again, in a moment later, too, he's gonna use that, like, swinging hammer thing to knock Will Smith onto the pool table. And that, again, is a case where you need someone to be standing exactly where that hammer comes down. And it needs to be your intention that what you want to do to them is knock them onto a pool table and flip them upside down so they're under the train. It's a little bit like, there's a moment like that in the James Bond movie Tomorrow Never Dies, where he's in Michelle Yeoh's secret hideout, and he rests his arm on Michelle Yeoh's lion head, and it breathes flame. And I was like, why do you have that in your office? That's so dangerous. I will say, to Will Smith's credit, I read that he said he regretted doing this movie instead of The Matrix, but he also said that obviously The Matrix is perfect as it is, and Keanu was the right person, and so that, like, worked out well, and he appreciates that. So that's good.
Alive and kicking. Well, alive anyway.
what's kind of like a second intro of Loveless. He has a few grand appearances in this movie, but this is the big reveal that Loveless is legless. This movie's just kind of grotesque. That really continues with this character in particular, Oscar winner Kenneth Branagh. He's just a very repulsive figure, as he should be, but he's also repulsive in a way that's kind of like, it's kind of genuinely unpleasant to be watching.
By the way, boobies look great tonight, nice and perky.
So the mistake, again, see, I was saying it's welcome, right? So the mistaking women for Kevin Kline joke continues. And yeah, we're back to the lowbrow booby slapping joke.
All right, be honest, did you laugh?
I laugh at the scenario that Will Smith, the actor.
Yeah, it is. It's just such a time capsule, this movie.
Will Smith, the action star of Men in Black. Will Smith, the, incredibly funny Prince of Bel-Air, has been reduced to this joke.
Here's the joke, yeah. Which
reminds me, if you're interested in listening to the full-length discussion of this episode, you can find it on our Patreon. The link is on screen and in the description down below. If you go over there, you will get the entire recording in an audio format like a podcast. Check it out, support us, help us keep doing this. We really appreciate it. Anyways.
Another example of just how crazy things get in this movie in terms of like what you could put in a family-friendly comedy is that they're straight up gonna hang Will Smith. He does a comedy routine standing next to a noose. That's a bold move, whatever else you want to say about it. I think it's a bold image.
Yeah.
And then the rope turns out to be yet another one of Kevin Kline's gadgets. Instead of hanging him, catapults him to freedom.
It's a bad tonal mix, you know?
Part of the reason I flipped on the movie soon after this is exactly the tone thing that you're talking about, because soon after they're going to reveal Will Smith's horrific backstory and the depths of Loveless's villainy. And that stuff is like so serious and unpleasant that I was like, okay, well, what's with the jokes? Like, choose one or choose the other.
Yeah.
You can't do a joke where Will Smith is talking about, quote, drumming on boobies, and then turn around and talk about, like, a town full of freed slaves being massacred.
And I can already hear the comments saying, but that's the problem with this time, of people being offended by everything. We're not offended. We just think that this is a terrible mix. The writing is really bad.
I think the KKK scene in Django Unchained is a great example of how you can have a really silly sequence in a movie and use it the right way to continue making the main points that the movie is trying to make. If the plot had something to do with all of the cool stuff that they show us, that would probably make for a great movie. But here, you just end up staring at stuff and wishing that the movie was living up to how cool all its gadgets are. A further thing in this movie is pool balls that, if you depress the numbers, they emit sleeping gas, except for the 8-ball, which causes a gigantic explosion. It's another example of why you shouldn't go on Kevin Kline's train, I guess.
I feel like his character was just basically, can I make everything do an alternative thing?
Yeah.
Well, sweet dreams.
Instead of cracking a joke at this, my homage to this movie, the level joke, I just want to point out, isn't the buff flap a little too high?
Yeah, if she's shitting, she's in trouble. So much money went into this movie, and I just had to comment on this green screen.
It's so bad.
There are a lot of things that look genuinely impressive in this movie. All of the stuff that's physically built, especially, looks very impressive. But 1999 was an awkward time when Hollywood was still figuring out how to use CG best and how to integrate a lot of VFX elements best. You know, this is the same year that The Matrix came out. I'm sorry to say, Will Smith.
Speaking of green screen, too, around the same time, this is also around the time when Peter Jackson was making the first Lord of the Rings. In the first movie, you know, he managed to create these unimaginable and unreal, but fantastic looking set pieces and scenery, while this is just real America. They couldn't spend a few grand from their $100 million to just shoot a location.
They only had $100 and whatever million, George. Oh, what do you expect?
This scene here. Now, I don't think anybody out there on the internet doesn't already know this, right? But in case you didn't, audience, what does Kevin Smith, Superman, Nicolas Cage, and Wild Wild West have in common? The giant spider. All right, so the story goes that John Peters, when he was trying to create or produce the Superman movie that was going to star Nicolas Cage and written by Kevin Smith, and I think to be directed by Tim Burton, right?
There's still time. Tim, Nick, get it together. I want to see it.
He insisted on putting giant spiders in the movie for Superman or Nicolas Cage to fight, and Kevin Smith didn't want to do that. Anyways, when that movie got cancelled, John Peters, who I think is producer on this movie as well, still wanted to do giant spiders for some reason, and this is what happened.
It's a shame because all the steampunk stuff is cool, and then the biggest reveal, the giant steampunk spider, is kind of not cool.
Bonjour, buenos tardes, and good day.
Yet another big grand presentation from Loveless, and this was interesting that by the end of the movie, Loveless has kind of openly become this, like, fascist. You can see very plainly what are, like, basically Nazi commanders standing behind him. Or maybe it's the Empire. Either way, same thing. But I did like that. I mean, if nothing else, it was like a bold thing that the movie did, showing that, like, the defeated Confederate rises up in the form of just, like, full Nazism, basically.
Wild West walked so that Marvel can run with Hydra.
I guess so, yeah. Not only does this happen, but it is the centerpiece of this sequence for an excruciatingly long time.
This eventually becomes his audition tape for Aladdin.
Playing the long game.
I mean, I did like the moment how limp it went. Like, the legs just kind of...
Yeah, it definitely... I mean, they got the failed erection joke right on, for sure. When Will Smith is looming over this just, like, helpless, legless man, I was like, this just doesn't... I don't know if there was ever a way to make this feel like an action hero thing, because...
What would have worked, I think, is if Dr. Loveless just puts on a bigger, like a mecha Hitler from Wolfenstein kind of suit. And then he fights Will Smith. That would have been so much better.
One thing that particularly annoyed me was how Salma Hayek's character works out in the second half. Because she's along for a bunch of hijinks, then she just gets captured and does nothing for the entire rest of the movie. We don't always do it right now. Hollywood still screws up lots, but at least we don't have characters like this anymore that are literally just brought on for a bunch of jokes and a bunch of eye candy in the middle and then, like, totally shoved aside.
If her character was meant to be just eye candy and just for jokes, then do that from the beginning. And make it clear and make it consistent. The problem is that, again, it's inconsistent. They established her as somebody who can defend themselves as this badass potential heroine almost, and then just nothing happens.
And I wanted it. I wanted to see her do stuff in the climax. I wanted her to be part of it. Like,
okay, so how would you rate this movie?
I'm gonna rate it a 3.5 out of 10. It had a fun opening act, and some of the jokes, like you said, George, just because of the actors, I was laughing. Where I was supposed to laugh. It is embarrassing to watch. How about you?
I rated this movie the same as I would say of a Burger King burger, which is it looked promising on a TV commercial, but ultimately a crashing disappointment.
The first act felt like the first bite of a Burger King burger, and the second half felt like the rest of a Burger King burger.
That pretty much wraps up this episode for Wild Wild West. So next week we are doing something that's completely different than what we've done so far, because what we're doing next week is the infamous, extremely gory, disturbing, but some might argue actually pretty good film, Martyrs.
Now, does Martyrs have a theme song by Will Smith?
I really hope it does. If it doesn't, your people needs to call his people. And okay, so yeah, stay tuned and for next week for the next episode on Martyrs. And that's it. We're done. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this video if you like it. If you didn't, whatever, it's fine.
And break out before you get bum rushed in the Wild Wild West. Rolling in the Wild Wild West. Okay,
there you go.
Keep it flowing in the Wild Wild West.